how could I get to the other side of the spooky season without acknowledging the greatness that is Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Yes, we're sticking to 2005 this year, with the duo set to return for their first feature film in almost 20 years with Vengeance Most Foul on Netflix. It's time to revisit the world's only vegetarian horror movie.
Their pipes are
In fact, whilst in development, Aardman initially called it the Great Vegetable Pot. However, apparently the DreamWorks marketing team fired back with the word vegetable being a negative with kids, which is pretty funny. And with this being right in the middle of the midst of DreamWorks having super successes in CGI rather than stop motion and 2D stuff, how exactly was this Wallace and Gromit movie going to breach out of its shackles and do something actually well? Well, we can see the dynamic choices they decided to make, as rather than the usual Shrek theme over the DreamWorks logo, we instead have the grand overture start immediately, leading into a full orchestral rendition of the Wallace and Gromit theme. This is probably just a British thing in seeing these characters in this context, but even just this set off hype for me as a child. You know, the Wallace and Gromit IP may not have had a series or anything, but to me, there'd been TV characters up to this point. You know, that's where I'd seen them. And now to get this bigger rendition for the big screen, yeah, it just works really well. It's a love letter to itself. And from the get-go, in my eyes anyway, this immediately establishes itself as Wallace and Gromit, the movie.
movie on the big screen.
The photo frame intro is also a great way to give some backstory to these characters and their relationship for anyone that's not aware of the characters up to this point. I mean, everyone loves baby Gromit. Establishing that there has been a long relationship. Also showing Wallace as a young man. Fan service, I guess. And I love the comedic beat of the photo frames becoming almost like a comic strip. Makes me want to make one of my own house, you know? Creator Nick Park did read the British comic The Beano as a kid, so it makes sense that he'd want to get that in there. And again, just through some photo frames in the opening credits, the audience get a full lowdown on the iconic duo. Then, from the quirky Wallace and Gromit intro, we shift into the Curse of the Were-Rabbit vibe. I wish more movies had the balls to have a title card as bombastic as this one. The transition with the puddle is also slick. Not to mention, dipping between the score and police officer whistling the melody, you know, we've already stepped into some masterclass filmmaking and audio work. Just a taste of the cinematography choices in this movie. And it's all helped by the fact that this film is shot with actual physical cameras. It's the stop motion format, not just CGI. Now, obviously, throughout this opening scene, the audience is led to believe that the were-rabbit is already on the move, immediately already playing with expectations. It's a great way of utilizing that the audience have gone in knowing that a giant rabbit monster's turning up and playing with that. I also really respect the marketing at the time for keeping the were-rabbit as a silhouette in all of the posters. Social media wasn't really a thing then either. So as a kid, I didn't actually get to see the were-rabbit until it shows up in the movie. Nowadays, they would have stuck it right in the very first trailer, you know? I mean, I bet the penguin will still be built up as a mystery in Vengeance Most Foul, despite the fact they've already given the game away.
Who could possibly be behind all this?
Better still, considering the plot twist with the rabbit's identity, having two particular characters sharing the same poster was also a great misdirect in many ways. We then get to the Thunderbird-style sequence of Wallace and Gromit being summoned to deal with the problem. Started off by a robotic gnome, which is to be the central plot of the new one, it seems. As an adult, it's hilarious that these two have this intricate emergency system for a pest control business, particularly when you learn that they've made extra measures to protect a vegetable competition, and that's it. However, as a 9-year-old, my adrenaline was going, let me tell you. I'll take this over the Avengers suiting up any day. It's not just that it's over the top, it's the fact that it also looks largely made up out of household objects like a kettle, and the whole thing still looks quite analog. Even the eyes are light bulbs. There's not a single screen in sight. I really like Nick Park's quote about the British attitude being cool because they're not, which apparently was an argument he had to make to Jeffrey Katzenberg, who wanted to have the design of the car be more sleek, which, you know, completely misses the point. The appeal isn't them having a shiny, exciting car, it's the fact that they've kitted out this old one with a grappling rope and then just drive down a giant hole. It doesn't matter that it's got a wind-up engine from the 1950s, a giant hand pops out to get the thing started. And to that point, the action with the car in this opening sequence is absolutely great. Even up to this point, they still don't reveal the creature on the loose. All we see is Gromit capturing some huge entity under a bag. As Mr. and Mrs. Mulch come out, everyone's on tenterhooks to see what's under it. And of course, normal rabbit with a pumpkin. Narrative subversion completed. However, what's great here is the characters' attitudes remain unchanged.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace.
For this movie to work, we need to fully buy into how serious this village takes this vegetable competition, and only adds to making the whole movie more quirky by making the village itself a quirky character of its own.
And I hope they give them pests what's coming to them.
Amen to that.
But just before this scene ends, a dialogue gaff turns up that's always bothered me. We clearly see the false teeth come out of Mr. Mulch before the rabbit takes them. However, when it turns around and opens its mouth, who says the line?
Reg, me teeth.
Mrs. Mulch. Are you telling me the gag of Mr. Mulch putting the teeth in is actually his wife's teeth that he's putting in? It doesn't matter at all. Maybe they just thought they were her teeth. I'm just a guy who notices this stuff. What is much easier to notice in the following scene is the first issue. Being a humane pest control business, Wallace and Gromit are storing all the rabbits in their basement, you know, where they built the massive rocket. Continuity. However, as evident from the rabbits raiding their fridge, they are running out of room. And yes, the rabbits are very Minions coded, but before the Minions. The same as the slugs from Flushed Away. Aardman were so close to getting in on it. Also, side note, just some more appreciation for the animators who had to get Gromit to slice those characters so seamlessly. Even small things like that are just so immaculate. And that one bit probably took them like over a week to animate. From here we go to the classic start of the morning Wallace and Gromit routine. Other than the first one, we get this scene in every single one of their movies. Whether it's jam on toast, porridge, or just a nice cuppa, we're gonna see Wallace come down for breakfast.
I'm in the mood for food.
However, the twist in this one comes when we're introduced to Wallace's arc for the movie. The man needs to go on a diet. But the fact is,
I'm just crackers about cheese.
I've got to respect them for making Wallace's love of cheese as a thing that kicks off the story. That's what leads to the story's central plotline. Fabulous. By the way, another thing that Katzenberg was initially pushing for was Wallace to be recast with an internationally better known actor. You know, his Shrek strategy. Thankfully, Aardman shot that too down immediately and got Peter Sallis back in the role. And knowing that fact just makes me smile even more when I see that he has top billing in all of the credits. Just knowing that at the world premiere he said, "I've never been to the premiere of anything before," and you know this guy absolutely deserved the world. Gromit gives him a plate of veg, which in Wallace's defense does not look like a full meal whatsoever. However, in Gromit's defense, why is he the one preparing all the food? That's probably why Wallace never ends up with his love interest. He absolutely would not pull his weight. In fact, here, he doesn't have the will to even deal with his own weight. So as this guy does with many everyday problems, he's been prepping an invention for it, of course.
Just a bit of harmless brain alteration, that's all.
He's about to absolutely just go for it there and then when suddenly the phone rings.
Anti-pesto humane pest control.
It's Helena Bonham Carter in her second part in a stop-motion movie of Halloween season circa 2005 with a love interest called Victor. The movie of which we covered just a couple days ago. These two movies are just the different sides of the same coin. And we've covered both this Halloween. Wallace agrees to pause work with his brain machine and head over to help Lady Tottington with her rabbit infestation, leading us to one of the most British jokes ever.
And we'll be with you in
Nah.
This is the kind of humor you don't really hear that offered in mainstream media, because it's playing around with more unique accents. This one, of course, being the Queen's super received pronunciation English, but even still, it's very Aardman coded, and it's nice to hear a little bit of wordplay in a different form. Also, just saying, she could definitely wait an hour. Anyway, as she waits for
Nah.
we're introduced to the villain of the piece, voiced by Voldemort himself.
What ho! For you.
Ray Fiennes. He might actually be my favorite new addition to the voice cast. He clearly has an absolute ball in this role, both pulling off Victor's most threatening moments and his goofy butter the joke bits as well. Including here where he loses his wig, and Oh yeah, gets sucked into the ground and nearly dies.
This confounded contraption virtually suffocated me.
I'm glad they show him trying to shoot a rabbit first, otherwise I'd be totally with him on why he's kind of annoyed by that. Of course, being a classic narrative thing as well, you often have your protagonist doing something good to get the audience on board with them. Makes sense that you make your villain do something evil right at the start so we know not to root for them. Also, this scene's the one where the script really sinks its teeth into some of the gags. And this one doesn't even need to be English accented to work.
I want to pay.
Take check or cash.
My hair is in your machine.
It's classic knockabout British humour, and DreamWorks were absolutely steaming about it, which is weird because they commissioned a Wallace and Gromit movie at the time. But hey, there's always a standard breeding like rabbits jokes that I'm sure DreamWorks were more than happy to hear instead. That's the more classic format. Anyway, Victor walks off with a rabbit on his head, which seems all funny until you realise that rabbit probably died once he realised it was there. We never see him again. And then we have our next development.
It's in their little bunny natures, and you can't change that.
Very nice. From here, Wallace's grand plan unveils as he plugs his array of rabbits into his head. Yep, that's where we're going.
We can brainwash the bunnies.
And for those of you who need clarity, yes, they use CGI for the mind waves. I know, shameful, but incorporating CGI with stop motion at least is a nice hybrid approach. I don't see otherwise how they could have done the rings with plasticine or something.
It's working, Gromit. Oh, it's working.
And naturally, it's the inciting incident where it all goes wrong, with Wallace's head colliding with the rabbits as we get an all-time weirdest shot of Wallace ever.
Get it off me, lad.
Honestly, probably the scariest shot of the movie. Until, of course, Gromit sorts it all out, for now. And initially, it seems that their grand plan to ruin these rabbits' nutritional instincts forever has paid off. Bunny Patient Zero completely rejecting the food that they need to survive, and presumably having a craving for cheese, which will probably cost more money than having to just buy vegetables for the damn things. Cheese is expensive, man. Either way, conclusion, humane pest control. And with that, our favourite duo head off to bed. But not for long. Following this, of course, we get our first proper were-rabbit scene. The inventiveness in this scene as well is absolutely off the charts. It's not just how creatively the rabbit gets its hands on the vegetables, but also the elaborate anti-pesto traps that not only exist, but that all these people have invested in. It's a double whammy that these villagers take the competition so seriously that they have these high-tech traps, only to see a situation where they are made completely redundant. Again, it's these details with the locals that raises the stakes of the situation, but in the most hilarious way possible. The short films never had more than 2 human characters up to this point, so it also gave Wallace and Gromit a sense of scale that they never really had before this point. Not to mention it does some nice things like using the traps against the very people investing in them in some nice quirky scenarios for each individual vegetable. With the scene coming to a head when we join the vicar alone in the church. It's one of many horror tropes referenced in this movie, and I'm all here for it. Even when doing a family-friendly play on the genre, it's good to see the amount of research and detail that the filmmakers have committed to. As if to suggest that the were-rabbit is itself a super sinful monster. How dare it eat food. After glimpsing that not even the vicar is immune to the competitiveness when it comes to his veg,
The harvest offering to bind the deal?
God answers his praise with a pinch of karma. Though I also love that he specifically sprays his vegetables with holy water to try and bless them.
Amen.
That's so silly. Anyway, back to the karma. Obviously with this movie, it's hard to exactly call it scary, but I appreciate the tension built up in using the camera as a point of view perspective for the creature only. Again, keeping it obscured. From the initial shots from the shadows to the full size reveal as it towers over the vicar. They don't waste any opportunity to utilize these camera techniques, many of which pulling inspiration from classic horror movie making. The tension is in what we don't see. Wrapping things up with the vicar trying to use 2 courgettes to compel the creature, and it's just an amazing sequence overall. And so we return to the main twosome for the next morning, where it's discovered that despite the rest of their system not going off, all of the customers on the wall have their eye bulbs going off, which leads to yet another criminally smooth transition, a morph dissolve. Yes, it is time for the church scene.
We have brought a terrible judgment upon ourselves.
Our first opportunity to see Wallace and Gromit in a full ensemble cast scene does not disappoint. As with a lot of these movies, the whole scene is another homage, this time to the town assembly scene in Jaws. Though obviously this time it's about a rabbit instead of a rubber shark. Several characters get their moment to shine, even the organ player.
Terrible judgment upon ourselves.
It's both a homage and a parody to the horror genre in general. In a world otherwise so zoned into the central two characters, it's a real treat to see this many characters being juggled at once, each with their own comedy chops. It also begins the town's gradual descent into panic across the rest of the movie until they congregate into a murderous angry mob by the end. This movie also does have a sort of Hot Fuzz vibe to it, and just saying, this movie came out first. And like Hot Fuzz, the local copper tries to manage the situation. Because yes, as far as this movie is concerned, they only have one police officer. I do enjoy this character though, mainly for this gag. And it's pretty cool that we'll see him back in the new film as well. Good old Peter Kay. And after a bit of a hoo-ha, Victor shows up with his gun proposing to kill it. However, Tottington steps in to give Wallace and Gromit a second chance. Wallace's best answer to catching it is...
with a big trap.
But having established that this entire village is made up of reckless, sheltered people and generally just slow idiots, they buy into that immediately. We can laugh at them all. The smartest character is the silent one. And so, onto another classic scene. The big trap in question is a lady rabbit. A very male solution to the problem, just chuck some lipstick and eyeshadow on, and what do you know, now we know it's a woman character. However, it is a fake decoy that Wallace as a character would probably put together, rather than other movies where that's how the designs genuinely distinguish female anthropomorphic characters, so we'll just move on. Gromit absolutely smashing it with the dancing before Wallace inevitably completely cocks it up. However, as Wallace leaves to clean up his mess, he doesn't come back, leaving Gromit alone. It's the classic left alone in the car motif. As we build up to what we all know is about to go down, I just love the little details peppered around this bit. You've got the shadow of Gromit's ears staying put once he's moved, immediately settling in tension. You've got two references to rabbit-adjacent movies in the same minute, with the grocers being called Harvey's, referencing an old movie where James Stewart becomes friend with an imaginary rabbit, which probably inspired Donnie Darko, and Bright Eyes playing on the radio, the main song from Watership Down. Or, as it's more commonly known, the most disturbing animated movie ever made. If you want your kids to see rabbits tearing each other apart and getting hit by cars, then you know where to go. Anyway, just after this sly reference, the rabbit's the one that hits the car. Get it? And oh boy, do I love this chase sequence. I cannot imagine the amount of work that went into making this work. I was just amazed by Gromit chopping some carrots. Try a van's mechanical arm lassoing itself to a giant rabbit, with said rabbit then dragging said van around the village, whacking it into lampposts and the rest of it. All the while Gromit still having to be animated in the driver's seat. Not only did they have to get this scene together somehow, they were the guys who wrote it and storyboarded it in the first place. Hello there, thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Do come along and subscribe if you want to see more breakdowns of amazing movies. Give us suggestions down below. Follow us on Blue Sky because we're happy to migrate away from Twitter. And I'll let you get back to the second half of the amazing Curse of the Were-Rabbit. And then the bit that absolutely slaps is the part where the van is actually underground and you've got all this mud splattering everywhere. It's just great visual eye candy, although the mud was done with CGI, but we'll allow it. Good hybrid work. But alas, the rabbit has gotten away. Sort of. So the next morning, after losing the rabbit, Gromit finally drives to the end of the burrow network, his home. The gift of the mystery unfolding from Gromit's perspective can't be overstated. Throughout this whole series, the USP of Gromit as a character is how much expression and character that the animators are able to get out of him. He doesn't say a single word, yet we know exactly what his face is saying. However, when this also extends how it affects the storytelling, it just adds that extra layer. When you have a character who can't vocalize their thought process, you need to present the mystery entirely visually. You need footprints on the ground and other visual cues. Better still, they take advantage of the obstacles it creates as well. When Wallace asks where he went the previous night, Gromit can't explain himself. I like that they don't take the easy way out and actually work this into the more strained aspect of their relationship. They can have Gromit being the super intelligent dog who works out a lot of the answers and encounters a lot of shenanigans that Wallace doesn't know about because he can't communicate any of it back to him.
Where are you going now?
Whilst Wallace moans on at him, Gromit follows the footsteps to the open basement door. And let's face it, this beat of Hutch apparently being the Beast is probably the most short-lived misdirects out there. The twist happens literally minutes later. However, you've got to love Gromit's over-preparation and building the new Hutch for Hutch. Imagine being named after your home. Should I start calling myself rented flat? And whilst it's brief, I do love this scene as a sort of callback to the DIY basement scene in A Grand Day Out. However, we then indeed hit into the real twist, again told completely visually. It doesn't matter what age the viewer is, everyone can tell exactly what's happened from the change of footprints to vegetables on the bed, because the path does continue. It's simple and slick storytelling, and a lot more interesting than if they'd kept the reveal until the full transformation scene. Specifically because it's put on a character that can't communicate it, and also allows for a lot of dramatic irony that the narrative does lean on for a bit next. And so for the next 10 minutes, we're building up to it. And what we're leading up to is probably one of the steamiest scenes in Wallace and Gromit history.
Do come in.
Also, by the way, Gromit takes the van to get to Tottington Hall, so how does Wallace get there? I guess he treated himself to a nice long walk. Fair enough, buddy. But yeah, this whole sequence with Wallace and Tottington has some serious sexual undertones.
Call me Totty.
Even the nickname Totty is literally English slang for desirable woman, let alone the other greatest hits of innuendos.
It's very snug.
He's never shown any interest in my produce. If anything were to happen to my vegetables, I don't know what I'd do. Mr. Wallace. Something no other man has ever seen. Feel its silken flesh.
Oh my god, Gromit, set off the sprinklers already, please! Having averted Claymation's first ever love scene, Gromit ignores Wallace's complaining as he anxiously tries to get him home. Also because he was tweaking over the fact he's surrounded by vegetables and he's part rabbit now. But of course, it's not that simple. We've arrived to the moment, folks. Having spotted him in Tottington's secret garden, again another innuendo of naming choices, Victor corners the pesto van in the woods.
And I'm not about to let some puddle-headed peasant poach her from me.
And considering the events of the scene, they were absolutely on the money on getting these characters to this location. This is exactly the location you want for a transformation scene. The gothic and isolated look of the whole set just sells the horror pastiche all the more as Victor reveals himself to confront Wallace to a fight. Yeah, that doesn't go so well for him. Apparently, Nick Park loves this scene due to it pretty much being the only circumstance where we'd see Wallace fighting the bad guy. Pretty short fight though, he just immediately throws Victor out the way. As for the transformation sequence itself, it's another beat where I just can't even begin to guess how long it took them to put it together. I do remember once there being a mention that one shot took an entire year because they manually had to put the fur on piece by piece. I don't know if that's entirely true, but you never know. And whilst the were-rabbit itself is more of a funny design, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that some kids found the transformation a bit scary. It's the hands for me. Creepy stuff. Transformation complete, Wallace suddenly doesn't seem so ridiculous for trying to move the giant log. I'm only joking. Considering he doesn't know he's the rabbit, what the hell was he thinking?
Don't worry, I'll see to this.
Gromit chases after him and Victor heads to the vicar for answers. Specifically, how to kill the were-rabbit.
The were-rabbit.
Which he is now only more impassioned to do, knowing it's an actual human being that he doesn't like. Yay, murder! A surprising running gag in the Wallace and Gromit movies. We also learn that pretty much everything this vicar owns is a gag or Easter egg. You have the more obvious ones like nun wrestling, the bullets to kill the rabbits are gold because they're 24 karat, you know the drill. However, the details they put in this scene are just ridiculous as well. You may have seen the creatures in the vicar's book. Were-cow? That's quite funny. Did you notice its Latin name was Numerus Pendulus Udderus? In fact, every Latin name is a micro gag. The Loch Ness Monster is Touristis Trappus, Bigfoot is Enormeus Flippus Floppus, and the were-rabbit itself is Carotus Appetitus Giganticus. I, of course, am a big fan of hearing creatures with Latin names attached, as I'm a massive Pikmin fan. We adore this stuff in the Piclopedia. Can never forget the Parasiticus Pikminicus. And if you briefly notice some interesting portraits on the wall, those are of the movie's directors, Nick Park and Steve Box. To be fair, considering how everything in these set pieces have to be handmade and physically put there, putting these little details in must have been pretty irresistible. Wonder where those portraits are now. I'd love if there's just tiny portraits on someone's real-life house. The next morning, things only seem to be getting worse for Wallace, with the ears now being a full-time feature. Combined with his increasingly rabbit behavior, the worry soon becomes whether this transformation will eventually be permanent for Wallace. That doesn't stop his Herculean levels of denial, initially arguing that it's to do with the new diet, but Gromit quickly shuts that down by releasing Hutch from the hutch. I do enjoy as well that they use Hutch as basically a vehicle to replay all of Wallace's catchphrases from the previous films.
I do like a bit of gorgonzola.
Oh dear.
It both makes sense, having had all his memories downloaded into his brain, but it's also great for fans to have all those callbacks. Meanwhile, as Tottington's getting the big event set up, the villagers, who seem to just travel in one angry clump, arrive with the news that the beast is still at large.
The show's off.
Thankfully, our favourite Marge Simpson-haired murder boy is on the scene to offer his services. As Wallace attempts to fix his mind manipulation machine, one detail I particularly like is that Gromit isn't able to fix it either. The premise of their relationship is that Gromit's the one with common sense, whilst Wallace is a bit of an idiot. However, it's nice to see them make a clear distinction that Wallace is definitely the one who has the brains for the inventions, rather than just making Gromit able to do absolutely everything. Nonetheless, too much of the rabbit has taken over Wallace and he's unable to do it. But not to worry, the Wallace Greatest Hits bunny is able to fix it instead. Although, somewhere I've just realized whilst making this, this story beat ultimately goes nowhere. The were-rabbit gets resolved without ever mentioning this machine again. Apparently, this wasn't always the case, and the original story concluded with Wallace and Hutch ultimately fixing the machine at the end, returning them to their normal selves. However, presumably due to notes from DreamWorks maybe, this was trimmed out to save time. The inventing frenzy is interrupted by Lady Tottington knocking on the door, coming to tell Wallace that he's a massive letdown. What a lovely message to receive, eh? However, unfortunately for her, she's arrived just as the moon's popped out and Wallace doesn't really have a choice, but to deal with it as poorly as he does.
Feelings? Oh, well, never mind, eh?
Ouch. It's just another example of keeping the momentum going. You could have just had the sad breakup scene and the Victor at the door transformation scene separated, but the absolute chaotic collision of all of these events is what makes this scene and keeps the story moving. It adds a farcical flavor to the scene, with one growing problem completely steamrolling over another. She sticks around long enough to get to the plot beat that Victor's going to shoot him, and he slams the door on her. In the second time we've seen Wallace's love interest walk away from his house in tears. Man, what a heartbreaker this guy is. Oh well, he's not a guy anymore, he's a rabbit again. And for what is potentially the closest thing to a dated joke in this movie, with Gromit dressed up as a lady rabbit again and running away to lure him, the were-rabbit then gropes the fake rabbit on the cotton tail, getting a big ol' slap in return. And, hold on, gets a kick out of said slap? Oh boy. I guess there's something to be said that it's like animal instincts, so it would be a little bit dodgy considering the real animal kingdom, but at least it was only a prop, you know? Gromit doesn't feel anything in that cotton. And then, spying a space hopper, Gromit uses it to lure this fluffy guy away from Victor, only for one of them to get shot. The end. Of course not really. But from the sound of one gunshot, the villagers have no hesitation to presume that Victor's smashed it first time round, and we get the clip I've seen meme to death. That's how you know you've told a good joke. The fair immediately gets underway. No need for further confirmation, no kill confirmed, off we pop. Of course, Victor discovers it was just Gromit, and we get everyone's least favourite moment in these, having to see Gromit cry. Why do they put us through this, man? Every time. This guy is the purest character ever. Can't he have a simple life? I guess technically he does, but The sniffling concludes when Gromit overhears Hutch reciting more catchphrases from the window. That's weird. I thought he'd clear at least a whole street on that space hopper. How's he that close to the house still? Anyway, hopping over the plot hole, Hutch is summoned by the anti-pesto traps. A seamless story development based on what was set up right at the start of the movie. Wow, beautiful. And technically could have worked no matter how far away he was from the house. Back at the fair, Victor tries to sneak around without causing alarm, but
The beast isn't actually dead yet.
The beast isn't actually dead yet. Oops.
of course, everyone descends into panic, fully completing the ensemble's transformation into a paranoid mob. Maybe 2005 really was ahead of its time. I wish it really was just about giant vegetable competitions. Anyway, in the panic, Mrs. Mulch breaks away from the pack with her pumpkin pram, unwittingly fulfilling Victor's plan to use it as bait. And I love the way she runs, it's just so goofy and great. He thinks he's all good to go, but then in comes Gromit riding his marrow into battle like a doomed sandworm. Also, Also, I realized for a bunch of you guys in the States, it's actually redubbed so the marrow was called a melon. It's not a melon. Why would a melon be entered into a vegetable competition? It's a fruit. Ah, Katzenberg, what you doing? We then get our King Kong beat. It's a classic. You have to do it with a giant monster. As when Victor tries to snatch Tottington's trophy, the were-rabbit sweeps her up and jumps up to the building. Gotta acknowledge the guy changing his garden tool stand to angry mod supplies. Never won't be funny. Brilliant writing. And we enter a truly entertaining climax. The jokes start coming at a Lego movie level pace, and I notice different bits every time as well. Whilst also you have the drama of Tottington finding out the truth of the were-rabbit. Victor then turning up and giving his game away.
You commissioned me to rid you of pesto, and that's just what I intend to do.
Crazy couple minutes for Lady Tottington, by the way. One lover's now a self-confessed wannabe murderer, and the other's turned himself into a rabbit. Classic love triangle, you know? We British, we have issues. And into the final chase we go. The dogfight sequence with Gromit and Victor's dog never fails to entertain me. Honestly, it's probably my favorite part of the damn movie. The action and the comedy are just so well executed. I love how brutal Philip's death initially looks before he's revealed to still be on Gromit's plane. Yeah, and like, it's just so fun to watch, no matter how many times you see it, and it gets all the characters into the right positions for the final confrontation. Not to mention just that such simple gag of pausing because you've run out of credits, only to restart it again with a nice little jolly break of character. I think this, beyond animation, is one of the greatest British comedies of the past 20 years. It is loaded with all the visual gags and wordplay you'd want out of British humour, combined with something unique that you only really find with Aardman. It may not have the most nuanced character arc in the world, maybe stay true to who you are, but does every movie need one? It is an excellently animated comedy and deserves every success going into its release. It's to the point I really don't care that there's no way Gromit would be able to make all of those maneuvers in his funfair plane faster than the speed of a gunshot of a giant golden carrot trophy. There's live action movies without were-rabbits and dogs that can drive cars that use the same plot armor, so we'll leave it out. In the end, you know, it doesn't even really matter anyway, as they completely mess up the whole thing with a high five that leads the rabbit to jumping to its death to save Gromit anyway. A fall that Victor also then endures, but he somehow survives. Not to mention, though, old faithful Lady Rabbit outfits on hand to send the angry mob chasing after him.
Drive out the monstrosity!
Probably killed him ultimately, who knows. And then yes, the bait of a death scene of Wallace the were-rabbit wraps up very conveniently with him just returning back to normal. In my mind, this is because the were-rabbit does die and then lets Wallace go in the process. At least that's what I thought they were suggesting anyway. It's not exactly the power of love and tears, is it? We'll see, we can run with that. However, we mentioned before that the old machine was the original plan that was skimmed out for time. Ultimately, while I think this actual resolution is just a tad convenient, I do think this was ultimately a good decision for the overall flow of the movie. It's a surprisingly long movie compared to how short all the other Gromit stuff is, and I'd love for it to be longer even more, but it makes sense. It's already long enough by Gromit standards. I see why they made this trim. However, due to that original version of the story that we mentioned, where the Mind-O-Matic would have resolved all of this, the crazy fact I have about this scene is that they shot all of this with Wallace still wearing the rabbit ears. They used CGI to swap in Wallace's human ears during these shots. Now that's some trivia for you.
Whoops. Oh, thanks, lad.
Lovely stuff. We then get to what is by all means a perfectly tidy resolution. Wallace and Totty don't get married, as the prior scene clearly wanted to imply. They instead launch a rabbit sanctuary in her front garden. And the whole ordeal ends by, unlike in the original script, sending Hutch back into the nature without any of his nutritional instincts. Whatever, I'm sure the groundsmen just have to feed him some cheese, and to be honest, if anyone can afford all that cheese, it is Lady Tottington. A short-term problem, as that'll presumably just kill the rabbit in the end. Oops. But yay! That was the amazing Wallace and Gromit Curse of the Were-Rabbit. And though it didn't make Shrek-level profits, it initially seemed like DreamWorks were ultimately happy having Aardman diversifying the output of the studio and giving them an overall greater sense of prestige. Nonetheless, the whole deal didn't last long with DreamWorks. You know this, we've mentioned it plenty of times on the channel. In 2007, DreamWorks terminated their contract with Aardman, and they went off and did their own thing. Wallace and Gromit would lick their wounds making other projects in future, looping us back round to now, with Vengeance Most Foul heading to Netflix in January, or Christmas Day for us Brits. They've had some amazing shorts, and now this new feature on the world's biggest streaming service. However, I will always remember the time that they hit the big time with a wide release movie in cinemas across the world. And boy, did they do it in style. For now, my name's been Daz, thank you very much for reaching the end of this video, and I shall see you in a little bit.